With databases, there are a ton of them. And even in my previous course, we covered the differences between relational databases and NoSQL databases. Relational databases meant that you had to define your schemas or how your database looked beforehand. And you were able to build really complex databases this way. And that's what Postgres is, a relational database. It's a database that allows us to have different tables that are related to one another. And we define those relationships with what we call schemas. And again, we use Postgres as a relational database to hold our users and passwords in our SmartBrain app. But there's a reason there's so many databases out there. Different databases are built to optimize different things. Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, Alibaba, Joe's Donut Shop all have different database needs. To meet all these needs, a ton of databases can be found online. And today we're going to talk about one of the most loved and used databases called Redis. And it's a NoSQL database. So this way we're able to learn a bit of relational database with Postgres as well as NoSQL with Redis. Redis is what we call a NoSQL in-memory database. And by the end of the section, those words are going to mean something to you. So let's get started. Redis is an open source database that is often used to build really high performance scalable web applications. A lot of companies use Redis. Now, NoSQL databases can have many different types. You have things such as document NoSQL databases. You might have heard of MongoDB or CouchDB. These are really, really good at storing documents. So if you think of LinkedIn profiles, where your profile has all these different fields and categories, and one user has that document-like data, in that case, well, these are really, really good. You have things like wide column with Cassandra and things like graph databases, Neo4j. If you have a social media app, for example, that describes a graph-like connection between its users. Now, Redis is what we call a key value store. And this key value relationship is a little bit similar to how we handle objects in JavaScript. We have a object property that has a value associated with it, a key and a value. And we're going to go over how we're going to use Redis in the next couple of videos. But the one thing I want to get across is that it is an in-memory database, which makes it really, really fast. You see, Redis is used for short-lived data in our applications. And it's often used with things like sessions or web page hit counts. And in-memory means you don't have large data sets, such as you would with something like Cassandra or MongoDB. You have small pieces of data, so tiny little pieces of data, which allow us to keep it in memory, that is the machine's memory and not on disk. If you remember, memory is something that is very easy to access on a machine, and disk is a little bit slower. You can store a lot more information on disk, but it's a little slower to access. So with Redis, you want to use it when you have small pieces of data that you need access to, and you also don't care if you might lose some of that data. Now, even though the data is in memory, Redis does take a snapshot every once in a while to save the current database contents onto the disk, which is great to recover from when there's unexpected shutdowns wherever you have Redis running. And you'll only lose the last few minutes of information. Then based on that information, we should be using Redis whenever we have small pieces of data that isn't super important, that if the service crashes, we'll be able to come back to a snapshot and we might lose the latest information, but we're sacrificing all of that for the speed of service. It is super fast and it's very scalable. And Redis, like all other databases, has its unique set of data types that it can store. And we're going to go through some of them in the next videos. And you'll see that it doesn't use SQL. It's NoSQL database. And we'll see how that works. In this section, we're going to get used to Redis. And then coming up, when we talk about sessions and JWT, we're actually going to use Redis in a way to manage session for us. Because as senior developers, we have to decide which tool is right for the job. We should know this by now. And although Postgres is amazing, when you have tools like Redis that can be really, really fast for managing small pieces of data, there are some use cases where you might want to have some information in Redis and some information on Postgres, depending on what your needs are. And in most companies, you'll see this. It's very, very rare that a big company has just one type of database. Most of the time, they have different databases all around because they have different needs, different ways that they need to read the data and different ways that they need to write the data. And again, based on that tool, they use different tools. So we're going to learn that skill of being able to use different pieces of tools that are as databases to work with what we have. All right, it's time to get started with Redis. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.